talked last time a pretty good bit about the whole thing of maturity and what does that look like? How does is it possible for a person to be spiritually mature but emotionally immature? My conclusion is no. If and I'm not even saying that your spiritual maturity is the same as your emotional maturity. I don't. It's not. We're not talking synonymous necessarily, but if I am truly spiritually mature, it that has to affect my emotional responses. So, yeah, we're looking for when the Holy Spirit through Paul gives this profile for leaders in God's family. If I just had one word that I could put over the whole thing, I would say mature. We're looking for a mature believer whose personal habits, whose family life, whose developing and growing spiritual and emotional maturity are above average. I mean, that's not even fair, but we're looking for a mature person. And then last time we talked about how it must, that's interesting phrasing that Paul uses there. We're in verse 8. He must not be a recent convert. Must not. So we've talked about this dynamic of a spiritually mature person, and that the pitfall is for a recent convert or an immature believer is conceit, pride, which is what really that's at the heart of why Satan became who he is and was kicked out of. I don't know what the technical term would be, but he was ejected from heaven because of his pride, his conceit. Well, okay. Verse 7. He must also have a good reputation with outsiders, so that he will not fall into disgrace and into the devil's trap. That's interesting. A good reputation with outsiders. How do you build your reputation with people outside the church? Well, I mean, your reputation is built with whomever as on the basis of, as a result of their interaction with you, your reliability, your honesty, your fortitude. You do what you say you will do. I love this term that I picked up. I'm so not a business guy, but I picked it up in some reading once. It said, under promise and over deliver. That's one of the things that creates this good reputation with outsiders. How you conduct business. Now, whether you're an owner of a business or maybe you're just, not the owner, you're not even the manager, but you, in your business life, you are WYSIWYG. You are what you see is what you get. You under promise and over deliver. You can be counted on. You're reliable. I mean, there's lots of adjectives that would fit with the person who's going to have a good reputation with outsiders. And then there's this about a good reputation with outsiders. You can't be isolated from outsiders. Okay, here's where I'm going with that. A lot of Christians don't really don't rub shoulders with much of anybody other than their friends from church or other Christians, right? And I get it. Our Paul, in another place, Paul writes, bad company corrupts good morals. I mean, the principle is you become who you hang out with. So, yeah, I want to hang out with people that will provoke me and draw me to, back to the idea of more maturity, greater maturity in my life. If I'm not careful, this is me. If I'm not careful, those are the only people I'll hang out with. I don't have a connection with outsiders. And if I don't have a connection with outsiders, how am I going to have a good reputation with them? Here's the other piece of that. If I don't have any kind of connection with outsiders, how will they ever get a whiff of the fragrance of God's goodness? How will they ever hear at least the melody of the song of salvation? In other words, I'm never going to draw anybody to Christ if I'm not somehow connected to them. This is to me a challenge. Now, personally, you may not be guilty of this, but this is my personal challenge. I have this strong tendency to not have these connections with outsiders. I mean, my closest friends and pretty much all the people I'm having any interaction with are Christians. Now, even including my counseling, some of them are really serious about moving forward in their lives, and some of them are recovering from all kinds of emotional trauma, and some of them are just paying the price for bad choices, but they're still Christians. I struggle to get outside of my bubble and connect with outsiders. It's feels safer to just stay in my little bubble. I've mentioned this before, but I so often I am giving thanks to God because He took us to Las Vegas. And you talk about getting outside your bubble. Well, one of the things I discovered, and I hope this won't be offensive to anyone, but one of the things I discovered is I kind of like unsaved people. Some of the unsaved, not yet Christian people that I encountered there, and goodness, I had no bubble. They were everywhere, all around me, even in our church, but I liked them. They were kind of cool people. And this is awful. This is a part you probably think less of me on, but there's some of them that I'd rather spend time with than with Christians. It's kind of like there's a line from a Billy Joel song, and let me see if I can say it correctly. He said, no, I can't even remember. Basically what he's saying is, I'd rather hang out with the sinners than with the saints, because the sinners are having all the fun and the saints are just crying all the time. Well, I'm not quite there, but today in my life, the bubble has returned. Some of this has to do with my nature. I do not have the gift of evangelism. Now, if you have the gift of evangelism, first of all, I want to say, may your tribe increase, because 85% of the rest of the church does not have it. The statistic I read, which makes tons of sense from my experience, is that 15% of the church have the gift of evangelism, so that it is, they can't help. It leaks out of them. And if you have that gift, you don't have a bubble. Nothing like I do. And boy, I try not to break the 10th commandment. I try not to covet. But boy, I sure admire that. The rest of us, we would do well to not put up a guard against these non-Christian, these unsaved people. Don't become like them, but look at Jesus' example. He did not hang out exclusively with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes, but he did hang out with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes. He didn't have a bubble. The people that he was most often in conflict with were these spiritual people. Now they, all right, I'm not Jesus, you're not Jesus, but his example for us, I think that could be instructive. How do you gain a good reputation with outsiders? By relationship with them, in which you demonstrate. One of the ways I think it can be said is you demonstrate the nature and character of Jesus. And Paul writes, so that he will not fall into disgrace and into the devil's trap. Well, now here, I'm going to reveal a bias here, but it hasn't been that long ago when dominoes fell and we read in the headlines, we heard about it on your social media, you heard it was everywhere about religious leaders falling morally. Everything from they weren't who they said they were to they were philanderers and womanizers. And they brought disgrace to the name of Christ. Now, he's plenty big. He can take care of himself, right? You don't have to protect the lion. The lion can protect himself. And yet, if we're not vigilant about our own character in partnership with God's grace, we will fall into disgrace. That's an interesting word thing. Okay, I want to live my life within God's grace. If I don't, did you see that word for what it is? Disgrace? Disgrace. Well, Paul says, if you're not a person of character who can genuinely gain the respect of outsiders, whose reputation with outsiders is good, one of the results of that is that you will fall into disgrace and into the devil's trap. Here's the thing. Satan never wants you to succeed in growing and developing into the person Jesus has in mind for you to become. Okay, I mean, there's lots of ways to say that. The theological word is sanctification. For us to mature, to develop, to grow in our faith, in depth and in likeness to Jesus, Satan will do everything and anything in his power to thwart that, to keep that from happening, to stunt our growth. He often does that through temptation. Well, one of the temptations is to try to build a reputation inauthentically. Well, here's what I mean. It goes back to that business thing I talked about, to overpromise and underdeliver. I don't know very much. There are lots of other things, but one of the big things that will kill your reputation with outsiders is making promises and not keeping them. But, see, what's the devil's trap? Well, is it he wants us to be disgraced and be disgraceful? Well, I think that's an outcome, but I'm not sure that's, there's more to it. And I've already used up all my time today, so we'll have to come back to that next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.